Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Nintendo Power Reunion. My name is Frank Cifaldi. I am the founder and co-director of the Video Game History Foundation. We're a charity that seeks to preserve the history of games in all kinds of ways, but we're not the spotlight today. These folks are. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And, you know, I'm not gonna bother with a cheesy intro about the magazine. I think everyone who's watching is aware of it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and have all the panelists introduce themselves one by one, your name and what you did on Nintendo Power, and let's go by Nintendo hire date.
Howard.
Ooh, then I'm first. So I worked on Nintendo Power with everybody.
And that was Howard Phillips. I think you can see the name though on the stream.
I'm Gail Tilden, and my hire date is actually 7/11/83. I think I'm a good year and a half behind Howard, and that made me not an old timer. And I think I worked on Nintendo Power. I was looking at about issue 104 maybe till early 1998 from the beginning. And I guess I was like the band director. I was, I was the director of publications, and it meant that not just editorial, but marketing magazine and making sure it got in the mail and printed and all those various things were kind of under my wing.
Gail did everything.
I was
going to say except for write, but then you wrote a lot of stuff, and so you did everything except for maybe the art. But you did direct that heavily.
Yes, directed.
What didn't you do? Don't know. You did everything. Gail gets all the credit for this evening.
Yes.
Right,
bossing people around. That was my specialty.
And you were good at
done.
All right, which of Gail's underlings was the next hire?
Leslie Swan here. I was on the magazine for 10 years, writer, editor, managing director. Had lots of different experiences, worked on contests and various articles, and worked with a lot of people over the years.
And then finally, Jeff.
Hey, I'm Jeff. My Nintendo hire date was May 12th, 1990. And I actually got into the company. I started doing like customer service, and then Howard left and there was a seat open, I think, something like that. Anyway, no, they hired me on as an editor in 91, probably, I don't know, maybe October, something like that. The first issue I worked on was volume 32, which was I think January 92.
It's so funny. Some of you know your exact hire dates. I've never known an why would I know that?
Well, 7/11.
7/11. Fair. Okay, so just open question for the room, but probably mostly Gail and Howard. Take us back to the beginning. How did Nintendo Power start? Where did it come from?
So, do you want me to start? Mr. Arakawa really believed in publishing as a medium. In Japan, reading magazines, it was at the time, a huge thing. The circulation of these magazines that had especially a lot of manga, that kind of thing.
Recording in progress.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Okay. So he really wanted to have a magazine because he really wanted to kind of, he felt that his daughters who were born and raised in the US, they also loved reading these Japanese magazines. So he just thought that young people would like it if we offered it up in a way that would give them that same level of entertainment and value. So he brought in a couple of Japanese publishers who were doing video game magazines in Japan. And he brought them in and had us listen to their pitch on what a video game magazine might be like. And so a story that is oft told is that I was on maternity leave, so I had to bring my baby, my literally newborn baby, to the office and hand him off to the licensing group, and so that I could go to these meetings. So Howard, I don't know if you remember getting those pitches.
I don't, but I do remember Famitsu and Famicom Shoshukun, and looking at the Japanese magazines and going over them with a fine-tooth comb, just to see if I could divine something about new games that were in the works by manufacturers, publishers in Japan. Kind of same thing as we did with Nintendo Power.
Yeah, so that was kind of the reason, and the magazine being named Nintendo Power. It was, we had other names we were proposing, and he said, I want the word Nintendo in it, and that's how that came to be.
Well,
and
what were some of the other names though?
Well, Power Play or Power Player were trademarked already. I think that was the leading contenders. And it's funny, in my mind, I remember it maybe being a beer or something, not something to do with playing games.
Oh, Power Player, got it. Yeah.
Yeah, something to do with a promotion that someone had, So from there, the company that we chose really was the co-publisher and in charge of everything graphic for quite some time. And at the very beginning, I think we had to tell them which games were coming out, but Howard and I had to go to Japan a few times to look at what they were doing, kind of steer it, give them, we came up with things like classified information and the idea that a manila envelope would be representative of secret documents, stuff like that. And so when we went to Japan, and they presented to us various layouts and ideas, but they had some specialty of being able to take photos of the games and make all these maps. And because it was Howard's job to play every single game all the way through, he actually, I don't know, do you have a photographic memory or something? That never struck me before, but he would know where every single call out was. Like every single radish in Super Mario 2, he would look at the call out and make sure that it was in this right place on the map.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess all the people on the panel all did have to do that, but it was kind of surprising.
When you play games, you kind of get into it a little bit, and you know where everything is. But that was a big part of Nintendo Power, was trying to be accurate with everything and not misleading. And occasionally it was weird because they had in Japan, Workhouse had the Sharp machine. I don't know if you remember, Gail, but it was like a huge copier type thing, and they had it hooked up to an NES or excuse me, a Famicom, and they would make like little photographs. They would print out these little photographs that were like 1.5 inches by 2 inches, and then they would cut them out with a razor, and then paste them on the wall and construct the game. And it was the coolest thing to arrive there at Workhouse, and they had put the latest game up on the wall, or the latest games up on the wall, so you could actually see the whole game. And back then there was no way to see the whole game except for to actually play it and try and remember where everything was. So it was super cool.
Yeah, and that does remind me, Howard, and Gail, I'm not sure if you worked on this. There of course was the Fun Club News, which I think a lot of people rightly can see as sort of a predecessor to Nintendo Power, but I actually think more about the official Nintendo Player's Guide when I think of like proto Nintendo Power. And Howard and actually Gail, were you both involved in that one? Or
yeah, it's a little confusing. The Fun Club News was a marketing tool that encouraged people to send in their warranty, so we could register them all and get the feedback, especially that one thing, which was, would you recommend this system to your friends? and we wanted that to be a 10 out of 10.
Mhm.
So the Fun Club and kind of Howard evolving as the spokesperson kind of came through PR and marketing, which I was directly involved in. And
I think you mean the Fun Club president.
The Fun Club president. And I was thinking about that today, Howard, and it was really Bonnie at Hill and Knowlton, I think, that was the person who really pushed that direction. But anyway, we had that direct marketing campaign with the news, Fun Club news. But when it comes to specifically what you're asking about that first player's guide, in fact, it was someone else. Her name's Pam Sather, who was brought on board to project manage that. And in fact, I wasn't involved in project managing that much. You know, things like people would say, what do you think of the cover, or that kind of thing. But that was not my project.
Yeah, Pam did a ton of work, and you know, having to sanity check every single screenshot and every single, you know, fact or bit about each game. It was just a horrendous task, but a good task, because then it documented everything and could be used around the company, not just by players, but also people in the company who really didn't play games themselves could use it as a reference. But Pam did all the work of kind of orchestrating and pulling everything together. But a lot of work. I still remember that.
So when you're putting together this first issue, you know, you mentioned earlier that the Fun Club newsletter was essentially, you know, to get a mailing list together is what it sounds like. And so the first Nintendo Power was sent for free to, I believe, everyone on that mailing list. Do we remember what that number was? Like how many issue ones were mailed out?
About 3.6 million.
Oh my God.
And you know what? The at about the time the decision was being made, so the Mike Tyson Punch-Out issue, we had reached around 600,000 quote subscribers. And so it was becoming extremely taking a big bite out of the marketing budget to have committed to this thing. And
because it was free, the Fun Club news.
Because it was free.
Yeah.
And if you could imagine, so from the point we said, oh, that's a lot, as soon as we said we were going to send this magazine out for free, and I think we sent it out for free from August all the way till like January, you could still get the free one. So probably people who are collectors, probably the Castle Dust issue 2 was the lowest circulation of the original group of magazines, because those were only the very first people who subscribed. So Track and Field, Castlevania, those would have been the lower circulation. But
so tell me a little bit about sort of, you know, the purpose of Nintendo Power. So Fun Club News was essentially to build up your customer base. And then when I've talked to you about Nintendo Power, I think a lot of people kind of assume that the magazine was essentially marketing propaganda, right? But you know, when I've talked to you folks about it, you say that it kind of had a different purpose to you.
A lot of these guys can elaborate, but a lot of things that Nintendo of America invested in were based on what had happened back in the early 80s, when we have all this folklore and ET cartridges being landfill, etc., that the way that people were going to, the way we were going to approach it is, number one, really incentivize people to make quality games and take the time, and really reward people making quality games like the licensees by giving them additional exposure, etc. But also the idea that it's difficult for a lot of players to finish a game. So we wanted to give a huge amount of support. So that way, when they would finish the game and their parents would be comfortable spending the money to buy another one. But it was Nintendo Power, definitely. But think of like the Game Counselor lines originally were 800 numbers, so they were free. I don't know if you guys have any other examples of those things, but you know.
So it was essentially more of a customer retention, not acquisition, right? So I mean, I think this is a good time to bring in Leslie and Jeff, because both of you worked essentially on what we might call like the strategy guides and the issues for the games, right?
Right. You know, one thing, Gail, that I always remember when I very first started was there was this huge emphasis on wanting kids to have a pleasurable experience with the games and just really engage with the magazine in order to just broaden that experience. I just remember that being a really important thing to everything we did on the magazine. You know, we'd sit in editorial meetings and say, is this going to make somebody laugh? You know, there's a lot of that.
So Jeff, when you were putting together content for the magazine, I mean, is that kind of your ethos, right? Is just making sure that the readers are enjoying their games?
Yeah, absolutely. And there were a lot of well, not a lot, but there were definitely several recurring columns or articles that, you know, we would get content from the players, like, you know, they'd send in their high scores or whatever, and or we'd feature them, like, here's your favorite games. So that happened all the time, and that was just part of what we did. So wholeheartedly agree that it was there to foster that relationship.
It was funny looking back at a whole bunch of things this week, how many things of what Jeff just said that we engaging the consumer. Sometimes we ran their scores. Sometimes we, well, of course, envelope art, that was huge. We'd get so much envelope art. We
would have boxes and boxes that came down from the mailroom just with envelopes that had any kind of artwork on them, and we rifle through those and pick out the good ones and have Workhouse scan them or whatever they did, and they'd end up in the magazine. So it's great. It's fun.
Those envelopes were also framed and hung throughout the building. So when employees would walk down the halls, they'd see all of this fan art. That was all a lot of fun. So people who weren't involved in the magazine still got to understand what the customer engagement was like through that art.
As you're thinking about this envelope art, do any of you have any in particular that stick out in your memory as something that was, well, memorable?
Well, it wasn't necessarily envelope art, but I'll never forget this one drawing that a kid sent in with somebody with a bucket over his head and said, "You stupid bucket head," because we put in a tip that wasn't quite accurate, and they just, "You stupid bucket head."
Okay, but whose fault was that?
It wasn't mine. I only know because I didn't write that column.
It had to be George.
Yeah, let's blame it on George since he's not.
Yeah. So I wanted to say something about the marketing versus kind of the product of Nintendo Power, and that's that it certainly served as a marketing vehicle for the marketing department and the salespeople, and it helped a lot in that regard. But it was one of many things that were done in marketing. For me, it was really more about getting the information out to the players on what the games were, which ones were out there, what made them cool, what made them interesting from a player's perspective. I mean, I would get publishers or developers would come in and say, you know, this cool new feature, this cool new character. And a lot of times what these publishers or developers thought was coolest thing about their game really wasn't the coolest thing. It was something that maybe was unintended, or something that they were just completely unaware of, because they themselves, in the case of a lot of the publishers, didn't actually play the games themselves. They just represented them. They licensed them from a developer, from a Japanese company, and brought them to the US market. But for me, it was all about the cool things in, the next game that came along. And suddenly, instead of having, 3 shots out of your gun, you had 5 shots out of your gun, or you had, 2 guns, or you could fly instead of just jumping. And those were the things that were really fun to share with the kids in a way that they couldn't get otherwise. I mean, back then, the primary vehicle for communicating with the audience was through mass market television, which was very expensive and also kind of really goofy and lame. You know, people running around going Zelda, Zelda, or something like that, as opposed to talking about the open world coolness of the game and the hours and hours and hours of exploration that made it so fun. So for me, Nintendo Power was just kind of an extension of the games that allowed the kids to look and players to look at the games before they came out, or even once they come out. They, you know, played a game at their friend's house, didn't think it was so cool, and then they read in Nintendo Power that on the third level there was this great, awesome power up that they could get, and it made them want to go back to their friend's house and play it again. So to me, it was more product, or at least it was a component of product that was the motivator for me of why do Nintendo Power. I wasn't doing it because I wanted somebody to buy another, you know, box of Fester's Quest or something like that. I didn't care about sales. I just wanted the best games to get exposed to the players so that they could make choices on which ones they wanted to play. And then also they could really dive deep into them.
Howard, I can completely see why you were pushed in front of the news cameras to talk about these products.
Yeah. I was going to say, see, he represents the players. He represented the player's perspective all the time. It was valuable and awesome.
So take us through actually just, you know, the production of an issue. Like how does an issue of Nintendo Power start? And we'll start let's consider it maybe those earliest days, and we can talk about how it evolved later.
Well, we have an editorial meeting. Only some of the staff would come, Howard, or in the future. And Jeff and Leslie, you could talk about what happened after that. But at the beginning, so Howard would come, and then we would review the list of games that were going to be coming out. This has to happen like 90 or 120 days before the issue is coming out, because also it takes a long time for a game to be manufactured. So it had already gone through testing and Howard would already have played them. And based on the game's depth and how good of a score it got, we would decide how many pages that game would get in terms of coverage, which one was going to be the feature on the cover. And some of the things that would happen, like at the very first Nintendo Power I was looking at, and Japan, not just Workhouse, but Tokuma also, they had organized it such that all like the reviews were together, and then all of the tip columns were together, and the other failures like Celebrity Focus or whatever we called it were together. And so very quickly we changed it to have more breathing room. Like you might have 2 reviews, then have something else, and then have some reviews, because it was really dense, the amount of color and screens and things coming at you.
But from their perspective, I mean, with the Famitsu and the Famicom Toshukan magazines, they would be like 250 or 300 pages of like the smallest possible type, you know, and you'd read through them and it was just exhausting. And you'd read 20 pages, but you know, it was just exhausting to do. So making it more easier to consume was a great thing. One thing you didn't mention is at the time when we started doing Nintendo Power, there was probably less than 100 people in Nintendo of America. And a lot of those people were in customer service, and a lot of those people were in manufacturing or final production, or the front office. And so these are people who weren't involved at all with Nintendo Power or, you know, playing the games. It was really just a small group of people at the time who was working on the magazine to begin with. And, you know, the rest of Nintendo really didn't know what was going on, to our benefit. We had a little bit of freedom and flexibility in that regard.
It's so funny to think of Nintendo as essentially being like a tech startup.
Yeah. Well, and you know, Nintendo of America is a subsidiary.
Sure.
And everybody knows the games that Nintendo comes out with are not created at Nintendo of America. So like Howard's saying, most of the people are in marketing, legal, accounting, all those professions. And so, you know, there was very few of us that were actually addressing gameplay.
So when you're having this editorial meeting and you've got the list of games coming out, well, I mean, first of all, like, where's that list coming from? Are you, is someone in, oh, it's from Howard. Go ahead, Howard. I'll just shut up and let you talk.
No, I was going to say, so I had to evaluate every game that came in, and two other people did initially, and that was Don James and Mr. Oda, who was, I'm not sure what Mr. Oda's job was. I guess he took a lot of notes and made reports to Japan. But the three of us played every game. Some people like me played every game to completion because I liked the games and I was into it. And then we'd rate the games, and then collectively we'd have a rating, and that was called the Big Three. But then after a while, I got game counselors who came in to help out as product analysts, and they would basically play. Each one would play all the games, but then they would focus on an individual game. And so we had their ratings as well, the GC6, Game Counselor 6. And then after a while, we opened it up to all the customer service people. And by that time, there was like a couple hundred. And so we'd get a huge amount of ratings from those people. And that served as kind of the base list of where we would go with games. We'd look at, there was clear winners, and then there was clear losers, and then there was the stuff in the middle. And so for editorial standpoint, we look at the clear winners and just decide how much coverage. But then it got a little tough when you got in that middle range to try and figure out which ones were really interesting and newsworthy or Nintendo Power worthy, if you will.
Jeff, since Jeff was with Nintendo Power till, I guess, 2007. So what after that, or Leslie, you were there a little bit after me. What did you guys do after that? I mean, after Howard left, there was another guy named Tony Harmon that continued with that role. But then what happened after that in terms of understanding what games were available?
Leslie, you want to grab that one?
Well, I was thinking she was meant longer. I just left 2 years after she did. We were in such close contact with the licensees all the time that we we knew it was coming well in advance. They would send us ROMs, we would play them, and then we pretty much made the decisions based on just our experience over the years of what the coverage was going to be most compelling at that point, and what the combination was, covering a broad audience, that kind of thing. And then I'm not sure, Jeff, after I left in 2000, how things carried on until you left.
Yeah, it really, I wouldn't say it was much different than what you just described there. We would still have our monthly editorial meetings, and we'd have this magical list of games that we'd go through and just call out, how much weight each one, we thought was going to get or deserve. And that was it. It just kind of, again, it didn't, I don't think it changed much over the years as far as, the process to arrive at the final mix.
So something I've wondered, just as, an historian sort of looking back at old video game magazines, Nintendo Power and otherwise, is that Nintendo Power specifically covered a lot of games that, they didn't end up shipping, but covered a lot of eventually unshipped games that no other magazine saw. And I guess I'm wondering, were you able to just kind of dip into anything a licensee was submitting for approval on the platform, or what? Like what gave you that advantage?
Yes. I think the licensees knew or had agreed to the idea that and wanted the coverage. So they had agreed that for marketing purposes, et cetera, that more people than just the testing group would have access to the product. They could have said, it could have been, or maybe it is now, I have no idea, that that everything would be kept a big secret and that they would steer all marketing, or, like having a blanket NDA with people for testing, but they had authorized that Nintendo Power, but other people could see the game's pre-production.
And I imagine that, being on the cover of Nintendo Power was a pretty hot ticket for a licensee in those days.
Not just the cover, but Howard was talking about games in the middle. And it was funny. I found someone who did a thing on all the Players Poll contests. So the idea that was a 2-page spread in Nintendo Power that they otherwise would not be getting directly to that audience. And these companies couldn't afford big $1 million TV campaigns and that kind of thing. So there was no internet. And so it was one of the ways they could reach directly to the target audience. So, they were extremely generous in what they offered in order to get that 2-page spread. So lots of trips, anything, Super Bowl, NASCAR, F1. I was rereading them all. People, like the weirdest props, we got Bill and Ted's phone booth. And we got, there was some movie that I don't remember if it was RoboCop or whatever. Well, anyway, some movie, we got the car in the movie. I believe we got Batmobile, but now I can't find that.
Leslie, did you say it was the RoboCop car?
It was the RoboCop car, yeah.
But yeah, we got really kind of things that are only one of a kind. And Howard, you might have been at Lucas at the time, but we had a contest where someone wanted to go to the Lucas archives. And it's my understanding the kid got to try on Indiana Jones hat and all this stuff. Did you do that one, Leslie?
Yeah. It was the most amazing experience. And that kid just loved it. Yeah, I got to go to the archives and see all the Star Wars stuff, Michael Jackson stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me that, the players contest as a reader was not something I ever put any thought into, but as I spoke to all 5 of you before this panel and asked, what should we talk about? Literally all 5 of you said, oh, we got to talk about these contests. They were crazy. So, let's keep going on this. So, a lot of these involved travel and I believe you had to host the winners. Well, not had to, but you did have to, but I'm sure it was not a burden in many cases.
No, not
Sometimes
a bird.
it was.
But you should talk about the Final Fantasy contest, because I did not work on that one.
Yeah, not Players Poll. So first of all, it struck me again today that if it were today, the amount of budget that was spent on that, generally we just spent the travel budget if it was a licensee game, because the licensees gave us the tickets or the gifts. But Final Fantasy was one of those games that Mr. Arakawa wanted to really push RPGs and to get these 2 huge franchises, Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, moving in the US. So we were trying to stretch the coverage out over either 3 to 6 months and came up with these contests every issue that you had to enter, and ultimately it ended up with what we call LARPing. People went to Tortola in the British Virgin Islands and had a LARPing experience. And Scott Pelland went in advance. Poor Scott, he had to go to Tortola twice.
Oh.
He went to Tortola and he went to restaurants and all these things. And so, that they had a custom menu and etc. And then when the kid came, the parents let like a big brother bring this group of 3 12 to 14-year-olds or something to Tortola. And then we sent Dan Osen and his wife Alice, who used it as their honeymoon. She played like sleeping princess in the forest. And anyway, that one took the most wind up and delivery of anything that any of our trips. But
Well, is that because it was a first party game? You put extra work into it, or?
No, you know what? Mr. Arakawa said, come up with a way. I'm like, we just don't cover games like that in that manner. We cover them the first time, they get a big review, and then they kind of get a video short, or they get a little something, or do they have any classified information? And he was like, that's not going to do it. So anyway, so the editors, we came up with this idea, and that the way we were going to extend the coverage was by engaging people through contest.
Jeff, you said sometimes it was a burden. What did you have in mind when you said that?
Oh, well, don't get me wrong. It was always fun, and it always kind of felt like a boondoggle in a way. But you had a job to do. You were looking after these people, and sometimes the kids are all over the place, and you got to kind of reel them in a little bit. But no, it was fine. We had some. I probably shouldn't get into it. Maybe they're listening.
Don't tell the specifics.
No, we had to upgrade some flights for some people, and because they complained about sitting in a coach seat and
what
things like that. And we did it. We would always bend over backwards for the winners, because it was a big thing. It was fun. It was, and we got to not only go on it, but we got to report on it too. So it kind of kept feeding itself. We do a winner spotlight or a trip spot, whatever. And so, readers could actually see that, oh, this is a real thing. This is happening. And hopefully that gave it momentum through the years.
Leslie, any of those contests particularly memorable for you?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Yeah, I ended up going on a lot of trips. We tried to spread it out and send whoever on the staff had the most expertise on whatever the game was, or the sport, or whatever that kind of thing was. I think I mentioned to you with one of the most interesting contests, we sent a winner, or took a winner down to the Baja 500 to meet Ivan Stewart, who was just the most gracious guy. He took the kid out pre-running the course in his own pickup, and just a great experience. And the winner got to drop the green flag to send Ivan off on the day of the race. And we raced from checkpoint to checkpoint because we had to be there before they got there, before Ivan got there. And Toyota had sent drivers in brand new big Toyota off-road vehicles for us to ride in. They were shiny new at the beginning of the day. And we were running through brush, getting to the checkpoints. Those things were so scratched up with mirrors hanging off the side by the end of the day that we just got out and we're just like, oh yeah. But anyway, Ivan won the race and took his helmet off, signed it, and handed it to the contest winner.
So that's awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have to interject here. There was one contest where I didn't speak to Leslie for probably a month because she got to go to Italy to the Lamborghini factory, and that was like, oh my God, that would have been the greatest thing for me ever. But it just wasn't my turn. So she got to
Leslie's husband is a big car racing fan, and I guess that means she is too. But she got all the car racing ones. So I think she went to France to the F1 race and did you do the NASCAR race?
Yeah, we did Talladega with Bill Elliott. Yeah, that was fun.
Oh yeah, that one. Sure, yeah.
Oh, just that one.
And he happened to win that race too. That was a big win for him.
It's the Leslie luck is what it sounds like.
Well, I was supposed to go to the Super Bowl when we had that contest, and then we all got grounded, no one flying during the Kuwait War.
Wow.
And it was going to be a present. My husband's birthday was on the Super Bowl. Anyway, didn't get to go.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Leslie.
I was just thinking about this last night, and I think you were still there. It was before you left, Gail. We had a brand new writer, Nate Bildorf, who's still at Nintendo,
And he hadn't been with us very long, but he was an avid snowboarder. We sent a contest winner and a buddy of his up to Whistler to ski the Nintendo half pipe up there, just to snowboard up there. And so the contest winner himself was a pretty good snowboarder, but the friend was not. And so they started out doing some things on the bunny slope at the beginning of the day. The friend fell and broke his arm.
Oh, no.
Oh, well, I mean, I was there. I did cross over with Nate on his first Nintendo Power stint, but I don't remember that. But
well, he just called me he's like, oh, I'm going to get fired. I'm going to get fired. Because just, we hadn't really talked about a kid breaking an arm. But the family was super nice and stuff. But I just remember how Nate was just like, I just started this dream job and now I'm going to get fired.
that's funny.
Howard, you mentioned earlier that when you would go to Japan and see them sort of laying out the maps, that they were literally cutting out these tiny screenshots and pasting them together and stuff like that, which just brings up I think a fun topic, which is just in general that in those earlier days, before you switched to digital layout, I mean, things were literally cut and pasted together. Is that right?
Yep.
I mean, what was that process like?
Yeah, it's hard for people to understand how magazines or anything was made. So you would make the maps and the layout, and then you take photographs essentially of the whole thing. And then it would go on these giant drum scanners and it separates into the 4 colors of black, cyan, magenta, and yellow. And that's how then the little dot patterns of each of those colors are printed. And that's how it all comes back together. And anyway, people just it's very hard to understand. It's super cool if you ever get to see it, but it's something that people don't think about these days. But so when we would go, and I would be, anyway, yeah, I'm sure it'll be a surprise to everyone that Howard was fungi and I was, you're going to do it this way person in Japan. And we would go over there for, to proof it or see what they did. And then I would say, no, the color, this color is horrible, or these headlight, whatever, it has to change. And then they would say, Gail, it takes 40 films. It takes 40 films, and for me, I was just like, I don't care how many films it takes. I'm going to change it, and Howard would be, in the background, like, let's all
go to lunch.
Karaoke. Let's go to karaoke. We'll all have some fun, have some beers. We'll change the 40 films. Everything will be
good. Did Gail usually win out?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No question. And the magazine was better. I mean, there was a lot of instances where it was a little shocking to at least my eyes, and maybe culturally there's some differences, and it just those color schemes hadn't made it to the US yet, and it was pretty severe and pretty kind of out of character with the particular game that it was promoting, like Pink with RoboCop or something like that. So it was absolutely a necessary thing to make the games ring true to their theme and how they felt to the American audience, the Western audience. But it was a little shocking at times to see, we just arrive and here it is, RoboCop, Pink.
Yeah. And also, since something that was super cool that I didn't appreciate at the time, I think when digital pre-press came about, that seemed like such an advancement that was cool. But now when I look at it, and I was telling Leslie this the other day, and I see that it was a Double Dragon, I think, and they had a #1 and then a #2, and it was a unique piece of art of a snake in a #1 and a #2. Like every piece of art was actually created by an artist for the magazine. And so it was really at the time hard to appreciate that it made it so unique. And I think
it
that
was a cool thing. I mean, if you think about it, Gail, the only other art for the game was in the manual and maybe in 2 colors, or was on the box, and that was typically pretty lame art on from a lot of these packages. And so to get somebody who was really talented and was a gamer and was into making really detailed, cool art, it was like the first expression of like a really cool dragon or a really cool dogfight, or whatever it might be, because there wasn't any other art for the game at all except for what was in the game, and that was very pixelated. So it was really cool that Nintendo Power served as a place for all of this great detailed art, kind of almost fan art, to be prominent in front of so many different players.
Yeah, I think so including that kind of art, a funny thing was that they would include things like sound effects, but the sound effect would be like a comic book art and embedded in the page. And even going through the first couple issues, it's sound effects that don't make any sense in English, but the ability, I'm sure that I wanted lots of them changed, but they couldn't.
I was about to say, those sound like you lost on those.
Well, and for example, in the Zelda comic, that comic artist storyteller was extremely famous. And when I would send back the comments, even that I'm not sure if either of you guys wrote that comic, but I'd send back that the sound effect was like wrong. And, it was like, we can't tell him. we can't tell him that it's wrong. What could we? And it's like, well, I'm not sure how we can mask the fact that it just doesn't make any sense. So I don't know, Leslie, you might want to elaborate on the whole comic thing, because it's pretty funny.
Yeah, I think people would just be so surprised to hear how I worked on the Mario comics that were in the magazine. And back then, we didn't have email. And so all the communication went back and forth by fax. And the way the process worked is the script would be written in Japan, and a Japanese illustrator would make really rough sketches of what's going on and fax it over to us. And we had a Japanese coordinator in our group, and she would sit down with me and say, well, this is what's happening in the frame. And the sketches were really at that point rough enough that we couldn't always tell which characters were in the frame. But the first step was they would send this over with a rough script and ask us to give them sound effects, because they had to be illustrated in, like they always say. And so Machiko would sit with me and say, well, this is the sound of a wooden thing hitting metal. And here's how much space it has. And so I'm like, I would be, okay, let me try to think about this. And then they would come back with another more refined sketch with the illustrated sound effect in it. And then at that point, we could still make some changes if we just totally misunderstood what was going on. And I just remember this one time sitting with her, and she said, well, she looks at it and she kind of goes, well, this is the sound of a cloud in the sky. And like, gee, it sounded like a cloud in the sky. And so it ended up being, it's just like, here's the sound of a cloud appearing in the sky. So I think I did something like poof. And that came back and it worked out fine. But then they would send us the more complete illustrations and the final script. And then I had the job of going in and trying to make English give the same information and have it fit into the talk bubbles. And that was always a big challenge, because they could say a lot more in Japanese characters than we can say in English characters.
I mean, that in a way is maybe your introduction to game localization, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So you localized the comics. I guess Leslie and Jeff, what were your sort of day-to-day roles on the magazine? Were you essentially were you mostly writing copy, or was there more to it than that?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, a lot of it, as you know, involved is playing games.
Mm-hmm.
So, after the editorial meeting, we would have either in the same meeting or we'd have like shortly thereafter, we would have, I think we called it our who's doing what meeting. And and it was that point that, we kind of dole out the games that were going to be in that issue. And, we'd go get ROMs or whatever we needed to get and set about playing the games. And somewhere during that process, we would typically go over to Workhouse, later called V-Design. And, if it was a mapping game, a game that had maps in it, we'd sit and go over maps. Or if it was some other kind of strategy game, we'd kind of take notes on the translation, because maybe a lot of the content had already been sort of put together in Japan. And after that, we just get the rough layouts and write to that, and then ship it back over across the street to Workhouse, and they'd put it in the layouts, and we'd ultimately end up seeing proofs at that point.
So you're playing games well ahead of their manufacturing. Was that ever an issue? Like, did you ever end up publishing things that weren't true in the final version of the game?
I can't really think of anything offhand, but I imagine it happened. I can't give you an example, but yeah, I think maybe Gail said this earlier before, but we never really had any issues or any big concerns about not having access to a certain game that we wanted to cover, because the licensees, developers, publishers, they wanted us to have it. So it's like they were bending over backwards to get it in our hands. Usually.
Leslie, was that a similar role for you?
Oh yeah, we all worked as well. Jeff and Dan and Scott and George and me. We worked as writer editors for the early days, especially. Yeah, we just played a lot of games and just wanted to make sure when we got to the proofing process that all the strategies were correct and all the callouts were in the right places for the games that we worked on. But it was a lot of fun participating in the editorial planning and deciding how we were going to cover things and what were the cool things in the game to cover. And maybe there's some item in the game that we've never seen before, and that's got to be a big part of it. But like Jeff said, once we got through with editorial planning and the who's doing what, you just dove into the games that were assigned to you and followed through to the very end of the second proof process. We did a lot of proofing, especially when we got to the player's guides. Jeff and I worked together on the Super Metroid guide, and I dreamed that game. We spent so much time on that game.
We knew that game inside and out. It was crazy how much time we spent on that. Yeah, but it was fun for me.
Yeah, it was that game. I just love that game so much that that was a really fun project. It's kind of fun when you're doing shorter articles in a magazine, and then suddenly you get the luxury kind of going in and working on the player's guides and just being able to just blow it out and really cover every little nook and cranny. That was always really satisfying for me.
Including, fleshing out storylines and having a chance to get creative in that realm as well.
Yeah, you guys we were talking the other day about this, that with player's guides or other things, like so Howard was saying the only thing that really existed was the instruction manual. And so when we were trying to elaborate or create additional kind of art or environment to use as what we were using to present, it became, whether it was comics or player's guides, we had to essentially make shit up. We had to make things up to embellish and make things more entertaining from a publishing perspective. And some of that has turned into actual lore, with the games themselves, and has continued for, 20 years. And so one that I like to think of is we were doing the Zelda Link to the Past. And there are these pictures of what it means to be a Hylian versus Hyrulean and how the ears are pointed and what the folk dress looks like. And this was a big, like, even the illustrator who was in Japan, who was helping draw the illustrations, we still only could get, these beautiful big illustrations and illustrated maps, like, maybe 10 pieces for a player's guide. We couldn't get, every single thing we wanted. But that particular time, Mr. Miyamoto came to Tokyo and confirmed that he, first of all, trying to explain these really, concepts like Hyrulean versus Hylian and why was Zelda like this, and blessed where we headed. And I'm sure these guys talking about Metroid had the same situation with Mr. Sakamoto. But anyway, that kind of stuff was interesting, that our embellishments ended up having to take a lot of license.
I mean, I can speak to that externally, which was that in my game development career, I worked on a few collections of older games. Some of them were third-party, NES licensee games. And we did end up, like, we needed to have names of some of the boss enemies in one of the games. I think it was maybe Chippendale's Rescue Rangers. I can't remember exactly which one. And, we were talking to the licensee, Capcom, about it. And essentially they said, yeah, sure, the names in Nintendo Power, those are the names. So, like, okay. So whoever named the bosses for that game, it's canon now. But, this does bring up kind of an interesting topic. So during your tenure on the magazine, all of you, at least a little bit, were affecting the games themselves, at least first party, right? I mean, is there anything that comes to mind in terms of like, oh yeah, I named that boss, for example, or anything like that?
Leslie named too many things. She probably doesn't even remember. But I named Zelda A Link to the Past. So that's the one that I always like to say.
It's a good one.
That was my big contribution.
Well, I think that when we went to do things like the one of the Mario guides, that a lot of the more minor bosses, they just hadn't named. And so we would press them, can you send us the names for these characters? And a lot of them didn't have names. And so we would kind of go back and suggest things. We never just named stuff and then done. We always like consulted them. Is it okay if we call this? But we did end up, you know how the players are, they want every little detail when they get those players guides. And so we would get these pieces of art with no corresponding names, but the readers definitely wanted them to have a name and they wanted to memorize them. And so that really took a lot of time to actually go through and look at all the illustrations, see if you could find a character that looked like that and what the history of that character was and how you would evolve the name. And then everything would be approved by Japan. I mean, a lot of it came named, but some of it didn't.
Jeff, did you work on anything that affected any of the first party Nintendo games?
The thing that I remember most vividly, I guess, was sitting around a conference room with the Nintendo Power staff and just it's like, okay, there's this new game, new Zelda game. It's called A Link to the Past. Gail named it, and we gotta come up with names for all these boss characters. And I don't know, that may have been the most fun and the most sort of, off the top of your head, creative session that I may have ever been involved in. And we did it, and so like, well, there's this big boss. It's a giant eyeball, and it's got a lot of these smaller eyeballs around it. And you got to use the hook shot, and it looks at you, and it shoots a lightning bolt or whatever the hell it was. And so, we had to come up with a name for that one, and that, I think that one being Cold Stare or something like that. And it's like, no, we can't have it start with a C. We got to go with the KH. So it's Cold Stare. So it's cool. just stuff like that. It was always a lot of fun.
I think it's funny because I think a lot of people who are fans of that series think that there is this like Bible, Nintendo Japan of the complete lore of all these characters and stuff. But I think game development reality is just like, we thought it'd be a cool boss if he was a bunch of eyeballs. We just threw him in there.
By the way, especially toward the later part of Howard's role at Nintendo, because originally, imagine, the games had an instruction manual and it had a few characters with the name like Cheep Cheep or something. But then actually he became responsible for localizing in a bigger way as games started getting richer. So sometimes I would go out and go down down the building to hang out, and he would be playing some game and trying to figure out what to name it. So I always like to take credit for Short Order Explode was a power pad game, but he also named or was responsible for the staff naming many things in.
I think though I'm going to blame you for Rad Racer. I think at the time I remember that as kind of like the disco type and use of the word rad. It was pretty silly. Maybe it was me, but I'm going to blame you.
Okay, well, the only part of Rad Racer I'm going to take blame for. So when you subscribe to Nintendo Power, you always got something extra or free. When we did Rad Racer, it was packaged with these glasses.
The red and blue glasses, yeah.
Red, blue glasses. And so we bought too many. And the glasses somehow came separate from the game, and then it was a repack or something. So there were like 150,000 or something. I'm making things up. I don't know how many. It was a lot of extra glasses. And so when we were done marketing that game, then the question was, we were going to throw them away. And I didn't want them to get thrown away. So I kept thinking that we would be able to print something in the magazine where we could provide these glasses and you would be able to read whatever it was. But remember that to send these 3D glasses in the mail with the magazine, it's like really logistically not that good of an idea. And for about 10 years, I made them move those glasses around from warehouse to warehouse as we expanded. And Phil Rogers was one of our executive VPs of operations. Anyway, finally, he had it with me. The glasses, they're going into the landfill. I'm sorry, you didn't come up with an idea.
Those things are probably like $500 on eBay right now.
I know, that's my Rad Racer story.
It's funny, like Short Order Explode. That one I just happened to remember that when it was first previewed in Nintendo Power, it had a name that I still think is very funny, which is Jump Burger.
That was probably Howard's name. It really is catchy.
Howard, do you want to take credit for any names that are good?
No credit for anything. The games speak for themselves, not me.
Well, on that note, then let's talk about Howard and Nestor. So Howard and Nestor was a comic strip that essentially was a stealth way of teaching the kids some tips, right?
Yeah. We were looking for, Gail especially was driving for, we can't just have more of the same. We can't just have more tips and tricks, more and more tips and tricks. We need to present things in a different way to make it interesting as a read, as a magazine. And I'm pretty sure, Gail, that was you who said, well, we'll just do a characters talking to each other, and one of them is the know-it-all or the knowledgeable one, and one is the quintessential kid. And the more we talked through it, the more it became quite clear it was a nice vehicle as a way to kind of present things without really spoiling the tip, but also have the kid act as the reader and kind of drive towards trying to find all the alternative solutions rather than just engage on what the tip was that we were giving. And so it was fun to construct them, and it was a fun vehicle.
In Japan, like we haven't talked about this too much, but really the first issue and where Nestor, came from and that kind of thing, it really did take like all night in smoky hotels rooms. We called it the Akasaka Prince Wars, and that's where I earned the Dragon Lady title courtesy of Howard. And
so that's a name he'll take credit for.
He can take credit for that one. And
Yes.
the art team quit in the middle of me.
On the first issue?
Yeah, in the middle of me not liking anything. And so, but somebody who's sitting there who's hearing all of this, like they're just sketching something out, and we could do it like this. And it's, so it stuck. It was the people who did want to continue, who became Workhouse and V-Design, they, they really wanted to get on the US sensibility wavelength. So it turned out great, but it was a little intense. And there was a lot of cigarettes. There was a lot of cigarettes, a lot of unhappy people. And it was
neither Gail or I smoke. So it was all,
yeah, we don't smoke.
oh, these guys just going, and having just smoking like a chimney.
So Nestor is the child of cigarettes and misery.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't know why, but we wouldn't work at their offices. Like Howard said, we would walk over to Workhouse where they had all the little screens taped all over the wall. But they would rent a hotel suite. And then we would just go in this hotel suite and everybody would come in and just smoke like crazy and basically just be locked in there all day and night.
How often did you have to do these trips? Was it every issue?
I think at first we went, and Leslie and Jeff, I think we used to go like twice an issue or twice a player's guide, because we would be going fairly early while things were still being developed or could be changed. And then we would actually do first proof there, because the actual preparation of the film that was going to the printer was created in Japan. So our final time of reviewing it to make sure there were no typos or no anything was also done in Japan.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And we had people came from Japan over to Workhouse, and we would go over there and do the first proof. And then somebody always flew over to do the second proof in Japan, as I recall.
Yeah, that's when we weren't doing as much design.
Yeah.
We weren't needed to do as much design input.
Well,
Yeah.
let's talk about the evolution of that. So, I mean, Gail, I think it was you earlier that said that, Nintendo Power essentially was a co-production, right? So it was NOA, and then it was the name
Tokuma Shoten.
Okay, and then and you just mentioned that some of the guys there, did they split off to form V-Design?
So Tokuma Shoten and Nintendo were co-publishers.
Okay.
And so Tokuma hired the art staff and the color preparation. So they supervised Dainippon and Workhouse. As things evolved, Workhouse established a US office and Tokuma established a US office. And then those people ultimately split off from their original company to just be a US company called V-Design.
Were they established just for Nintendo Power?
Yeah, although they, you guys could talk about it a little later, but they definitely got work from some other video game industry people, especially for instruction manuals or things like that. But they were pretty focused on the video game industry.
So let's see. So Jeff, something that you were involved in the 90s, along with Gail, I believe, was the merchandise catalog, right? So how did that come together? Like what was that all about?
I think the first time that we considered doing, branded merchandise and offering it for sale was in our 50th issue. So our 50th issue also marked the 5-year anniversary of the magazine. And it was also at that time, I think we had started this concept of the Superpower Club. So we had this club concept going on, and I don't remember all the details. It's been a long time. But I do remember we had 3 pages of merchandise in that 50th issue. We had like t-shirts and a hat and a watch and magazine holders. And I think we had a trading card holder as well. And it kind of was more of an experiment than a concerted effort to do that moving forward. I think we just wanted to kind of put the feelers out with that and see if it was viable for moving forward. And it turns out that it was. I think it went pretty well. I don't remember any numbers or anything, but and then I don't know, maybe not too long after that, we started producing. Check me if I'm wrong, Gail, but I think they were twice yearly merchandise catalogs. And within that catalog, and also within the magazine, we would put in stamps. So you could collect these stamps and use them as dollars off coupons on merchandise. And there were different ways to earn those as well.
I still have a watch.
What?
I still have a watch.
Nintendo's merchandise licensing program at that time, like in terms of at retail being able to buy a t-shirt or a watch or something, nothing was really happening. In general, licensed merchandise wasn't as big as it is today, but so there weren't a lot of lunch boxes or game cases or whatever. But we had met these guys when we did the Final Fantasy contest, and they helped with the merch that we gave away at the lower levels. And so we formed a relationship with them to manage the Superpower Super Club. And they since then, the company's name is BDNA or BDA Associates or something now. Anyway, they continue to be a big licensee, and they make carrying cases and stuff. They make stuff that you actually buy at retail. But they would work with us to come up with creative ideas, because there's only so many things you can do without actually making a giant quantity of things that have to be tooled, or stuffed animals that have to be, cut and sewn in somewhere. So apparel's always easy, or flat things like trading card holders or something like that. But we tried to be as creative as we could.
Yeah, and we did ultimately, do more complicated merchandise, like, the plush toys, and those went over really well. What was I gonna say? Ben Susan Deutsch and Associates was the name of the company, and they're now known as BDA. And they have some splinter companies as well that they do licensed products. So that relationship in the beginning with them actually turned out to be a very good thing for them. So
I'm going to do audience Q&A at the end of the stream, but there's one here that I just have to throw in while we're on this topic. This is from Top Spot 123. One of my prized possessions is a Super Metroid poster from the Super Power Club catalog, and it's hand-signed and numbered by Samus Aran herself. At the risk of breaking the illusion, do you know who did the signing?
Jeffy, did you do it?
I didn't sign them. I think maybe. I do not remember who did that. No, sorry.
That's okay. So Leslie just pulled out an issue of Nintendo Power.
To see if there's a signature on it.
Well, I was the Link's Awakening issue, which I think is 50, right?
Yeah, this is the 50.
Yes, it's gold.
Gail, actually, that brings to mind that you had some sort of like gimmick covers like that you liked doing, right?
Yeah, every January. So in the summertime, we would get together. We would have these offsites and come up with what we wanted to change in the magazine, different columns. I mean, we changed the way the ratings that Howard talked about. We changed the way we presented them several times. And then in January, usually we would make that change of what we were going to do. But along with that was a special cover. So we had the famous 1995 black cover, and the one year there was the Mickey Mouse cover was a double cover, so you could fold it out. We also did one where we had, I can't remember what game it is. I have it written down somewhere, but we did 4 different covers.
It was
it's Star
Wars.
So you didn't know whatever cover you got was a different character in the game. That was pretty cool.
I collect all the variants here. I didn't know about that. I shouldn't write notes right now. So this is kind of a big question, I guess, but during your tenures at the magazine, as you're thinking through, your entire time on it, what were the sort of big broad stroke changes that evolved the magazine as you went? Like, I would imagine digital publishing had to be a huge shift, right?
Yeah, so digital publishing was giant because we ended our relationship with Tokuma, and a person who'd been running the pre-press digital art there joined us, and their staff joined us. So at that point, not the technical maps, etc., but the creative layout for the magazines, along with the editors, became in-house. So our staff kind of more than doubled at the time, and it was super fun that we could do that. Another big mark for me is that in 1990, a little before 95, but with Windows 95 and the internet the web becoming so big, we added Nintendo.com, and all of the online publishing was part of our group. So that was also a big change, and fun, and a big change.
I mean, Howard, you left a little bit early, I think 91. Were you still kind of watching the magazine from a distance? Did you notice things changing without you?
Yeah, but for me, the big changes were earlier when we, when 132 pages of, 4 color was pretty impressive. And we had what was the binding? Not perfect bound, yeah. But the other one? Saddle stitched. And so those actually felt like big changes. Things like you could pull you could open it up and undo the staples and pull the map out. That was like a really cool thing. And, moving to the strategy guides, that was kind of almost unthinkable. And it made my head explode to think that you were going to have to do something about Super Mario 3 that was going to be huge. Or, Ninja Gaiden or Final Fantasy, or, the 4-player strategy guide. That was kind of goofy. But, those were big changes for the magazine. That was this one thing. And suddenly we were doing this nothing but a strategy guide. That was a significant change to me from a content standpoint. Technology-wise, not so much, but just what you got out of the magazine, it was a big deal.
Yeah, that 4-player strategy guide, every one of those I've seen is just in mint condition. Just Leslie, let's go to you, and then we'll end on Jeff with that, because Jeff was there for a very long time.
Oh, I think that one of the things that, as I think back on it, we were doing pay stuff there in the beginning, like we talked about before, and things just kind of evolved. And so when you look back at where we were when I left, it's just impossible to think that how we were working in the beginning, because, you know, as Gail mentioned, you know, the art group moving over, we just kept getting more and more involved in driving the art direction, even, you know, sitting right down with the people over at V Design, just talking about the designs and what would best suit the game, and how to best serve delivering the information and things. It was a big step when you think that we didn't have email when we started, and then we did everything by internet by the time I left. It was just the whole broad production process just evolved to such a degree that it's hard to believe where we were.
And then Jeff, you were there once. Well, you were there longer than anyone here, and you were there until the change to future publishing in, I think, 2007, 2008, something like that. So you must have seen it change quite a bit as well.
Yeah, it's funny. You know, you look back and think about the technology milestones in general with email and internet and desktop publishing, and you know, it's like all those things had a huge impact on what we did and how we, you know, move through it day to day. Especially the desktop publishing, that allowed us to really just bring it all in. And, you know, like Gail said, we brought the token with people in-house, and it made it a lot more, well, not only fun, I think, but, you know, it was certainly a very collaborative environment. And yeah, so I think that was probably the biggest thing.
The fact that we all could sit down together instead of just having stuff delivered from Japan or someplace else. The fact that we could all sit in a room together and hear everybody else's perspectives, from the artist perspective, the DTP perspective, the writer's perspective, just that collaboration was just so much fun.
And as games got more complicated, did it become more complicated to cover the games?
Yeah. I mean, the level of detail was just amazing. Again, just that much more challenging to get it all in and get it covered, you know, accurately and completely.
But as the technology progressed, there's a certain aspect of that became easier as well. So it's,
well, like screenshots, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Significantly easier. Yeah.
You know, you could just whip maps out like, you know, it was nothing at that point. So,
you know, Jeff also was responsible then, as his career moved, for selling advertising. We did not have advertising in the magazine in the beginning, and the company must have decided that they wanted to subsidize further through having paid advertising. And originally, this idea that if we didn't have paid advertising, we wouldn't be beholden to anyone, or we wouldn't let people like buy a 10-page spread and promote a game that we thought was crap. But anyway, I wasn't involved in that switch to accepting advertising, but that was a role Jeff had.
You were actually in the room when it was decided.
That must be why I left.
It was part of it. And then I had to wear it at that point. So if you don't like it, ads in the magazine, you can blame me. That's fine. But we never took away pages of content to put ads in. It was always, you know, we'd add another signature or two or whatever we needed to, you know, to fill out that space.
What's the biggest page count you think you got to?
Oh my God, I think we were over 200 for a couple of, I think what we would call our holiday issues, you know, where everybody would want to get their ads in for the holiday season.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to take a break right now, everyone. Thank you so much for doing this panel for us. I really appreciate it. But stick around. We're going to be back for a Q&A soon. But before we do that, we're going to allow these panelists to take a little break, and we're going to switch over after a brief break on the stream to Stefan Reese from the Interactive Art Collection, who's brought on a few artists who contributed to the magazine. And we're going to do a little mini panel, maybe about a half hour or so, and then we're going to bring everyone back for audience Q&A at the end. So stick around, and thank you, everyone, and we'll be back really soon.
All right.
good. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Art of Nintendo Power panel, brought to you by the Interactive Art Collection and the Video Game History Foundation. Just a brief bit on the Interactive Art Collection. We are a 501c3 nonprofit that focuses on the original art from the video game industry. We currently house the largest private collection of original art from Nintendo Power Magazine, which also gives us a wonderful Rolodex of friends that we've met along the way who contributed to the magazine. So today, I am absolutely thrilled to introduce you to David Hardo, Kevin Brockschmidt, and Scott Dowse. Let me get my PowerPoint. There we go. David Hardo, you will recognize from almost half of the traditional painted covers for Nintendo Power Magazine. So alongside Dan McGowan, the two of you basically ruled the roost back in the day. Just a tremendous traditional airbrush artist. We'll get to picking your brain on airbrushing a little bit later. Scott Dowse, you were with V-Design for the better part of 5 years, right? Doing not only character design, but ancillary art pieces. I think earlier Gail had mentioned that like everything was hand drawn by artists. So here, you're seeing some background images from Indiana Jones that were just very subtle imagery, but there was a hand behind all of that, and Scott was responsible for quite a bit of that. Also did a fair bit of art direction, right, Scott? I think in your time there
doing
as well?
Art directing and doing a lot of the layouts.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And Kevin Brockschmidt, very well known in the for the American artists for being the guy that painted in cells, which was pretty rare for the magazine actually. Also did a lot of first party art, like Kirby, a lot of the big third parties like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So thank you all three of you for being here. I know we only have about a half an hour, so I kind of want to give the time over to y'all, and we're gonna have Q&A after that. But so I really wanted to start with one of the wonderful things about having the three of you on that I was very happy about is that the three of you came to the magazine in three different ways. So Kevin was a totally independent contractor, and David got contracted through Griffiths Advertising, and Scott was a member of V-Design. So you all kind of came to the magazine in three different ways. So I was curious if you would be willing to tell your story as to kind of how the three of you got working on the magazine.
Sure, David Harto here. Yeah, I'll just jump in. So I was a commercial illustrator in the 80s and 90s, and had a pretty great career. I just finished art school and jumped right in. And I focused on airbrush specifically because I had so many of the disciplines that I liked. But the airbrush for me, the fun part about it was that everybody that saw it was like, oh, that's like magic. How do you even do it? It's so smooth and blah, blah, blah. So it had a lot of wow factor right up front. So I go, oh, what the hell? I'll just go stick with this. I liked other mediums too, but I just stuck with the airbrush. So then I got an agent, and I was a commercial artist in Seattle, and I did all sorts of things, not just Nintendo game stuff. I mean, I did billboards for Seahawks and Mariners and covers for, Microsoft things, advertising for, you name it, local companies. And so Griffiths Advertising, Lynn Griffiths, contacted my agent, Pat Hackett, and was looking for someone that could do, and I think they specifically wanted airbrush. And so I went in and met with her, and she gave me the first gig was to do, a cover. And so that's how I got involved with them. And then, things would pop up and they would just call me, and so, so that's how I got in. I didn't seek them out. I'm not a gamer of any kind. I've, never played video games. They used to always want to give me games so I could, research the character, But what they did, what I did was I rendered these characters although at the time I was looking, they were on screen, they weren't as highly rendered. So they wanted me to flesh them out. And so I said, well, do you want to just take the game and watch it? And I go, no, I have nothing to play it on, and I'm not interested in that. So I would either look at other people's drawings of, Mario or Luigi or whoever, Star Fox, and I would say, okay, and then I would add my twist to it and render him or whoever it was how I felt was done. And so we would go through a series of pencil sketches, and he knew what the cover was where the type was gonna be on the cover, and they would art direct and say, well, we want this to look kind of like this. And so I would do a sketch, and they would either say, yeah, that's perfect, and then I would do a color comp. I would go over top of my sketches with a colored pencil and kind of really make almost a really nice drawing in a colored pencil. It just made it easier for me. And then when I went to airbrush, I just went to airbrush. So that's how I got hooked up with them and was with them for several years. Did a lot of different pieces for them, all Nintendo-ish. I don't think I did anything that wasn't Nintendo. But anyway, that's how I got into the Nintendo Power game.
Awesome. Scott, let's go to you.
My route to get into Nintendo was purely, I just needed a job. I moved to Seattle in 1990 to go to the Art Institute, and my passion at the time was illustration. But I joined the Art Institute and started taking the courses and stuff. And one of the instructors was smart enough to tell me that don't just focus on one thing. You might want to focus it or back yourself up with something else, maybe like with design skills. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, I kind of studied both. So I graduated from the Art Institute and started looking for a job. And, they called me in for an interview. I had no idea what it was about. Like, it didn't say it was for Nintendo. They just said you need to have graphic design skills and work in an environment that is there's going to be a lot of like a bilingual environment because there's a lot of Japanese employees. And I was like, this sounds great. Interviewed and they hired me, and I turned out to be one of the layout designers for Nintendo Power Magazine.
So did you work at Griffiths then?
No, I worked at V-Design.
Okay.
Yeah.
I also I was the first graduating class of the Art Institute of Seattle.
Oh, really?
And do you remember a letterform designer, Nancy Stentz?
Yes.
That's my wife. So we met in art school, like almost 40 years ago. And we're still together, and that's been a really great thing. But yeah, awesome. She taught there for a while. So I was, just curious if you knew of
that.
Her,
is awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
That seemed to be a trend. A lot of you went to Art Center. Kevin, let's go to you.
All right. So you guys said you can hear me fine because
yes.
I'm all muted in my head.
No, you sound great.
I feel like I'm underwater. So I'm a Art Institute of Seattle dropout. I went there for 1 year and I felt like I wasn't getting anything out of it, so I quit. I was the guy who the teacher always said, hey, look at the way Kevin's doing it. That's the way you should do it. And I'm going, well, what am I paying for here? So anyway, I went to WSU to get a graphic design degree. So that's what I ended up with. Worked in newspapers for a while, doing layout design and illustration and cartoons, editorial cartoons. So I've always been kind of a cartoonist guy, and I wanted to get into comic books, but could never get through the door. And so I was doing all kinds of just freelance work, just anything I could get that would use cartoon artwork. And then I actually spent 2 years in Japan right before I got on with Nintendo Power, but that had nothing to do with me getting on to Nintendo Power. It just happened to be a coincidence. But basically what I did was I would just send samples out to everybody I wanted to work for. And in the case of Nintendo Power, I did a bunch of sample, a rendering of Mario and a rendering of Zelda and a rendering of Kirby. And I just sent them a whole bunch of sample pieces of art that I did. And they liked it. And they said, and one of them happened to be the cell painted art, because I was a little bit of an anime fan and I liked that look. So that was why one of my, oh, that's a sample right there, the dragon. So that was what got me work at Nintendo Power. And then I guess as far as the work goes, you'll see a number of different ways I did things. I actually did some stuff in, these are done in felt markers.
Yeah, on like computer paper.
Yeah, I had these.
This was really challenging to frame, let me tell you.
Yeah, I had one of those huge designer sets of like 200 felt markers. And I went through a phase where I was doing everything with felt markers. So I thought, oh, this is so quick and easy. I love this. I don't mix any colors. But ultimately, I didn't really like the way the drawings turned out because you couldn't blend anything. So I ultimately abandoned that. Another one type of work I did was a lot of, they were called transparent acrylics. And so they look like watercolor, but they're actually much more vibrant and bright. And some of the early stuff I did for them was actually watercolor. And if you compare that to the later stuff, you'll see that there's a brightness difference. The colors are very different.
Do you know what it is we're looking at here?
It's hard to remember. I mean, that does look like it's probably the transparent acrylics. Because like, especially when you see the greens come out really nice and bright. And then how you mentioned the cell art here. Didn't do a whole lot of that really. I did a whole big series of this one because some of the artwork I was trying to match had actually been done originally in that style. And so I wanted mine to just continue and look the same.
That's actually one thing I wanted to touch upon with the group is that as far as art direction is concerned, like how much, I know David, you had said that you were commissioned specifically for airbrush, but I guess this is more for Scott and Kevin. Like, how prescriptive were they with like art style or like medium? Because I know like Scott, I have some stuff of yours that's like that's drawn on plaster or like some sort of textured board. But like also like the art style from page to page. Sometimes I pulled this one because it's such a prime example. Like this is one of Scott's, but like the other two images on the same page are in a completely different art style. And like that, I've always felt like that was really charming. Like it made the magazine feel like it was something like me and my friends could have put together. I know Gail's probably in the background shaking her fist, but so I was just kind of curious, like how intentional was that? How much direction you got for like style? Like Kevin, were they saying like, please do this in cells, or like how much direction was the magazine giving you?
From my point of view, so this is a great example. I had artwork from the developer, the person who made the game, the company who made the game. They're sending us artwork, but they didn't send us, one piece that, was missing one piece, and I didn't want to leave it blank. So I just went ahead under my own, art direction and did a piece and stuck it in there, and it made it past everybody. I mean, everybody approved it. So nobody said anything. But that's how we did a lot of the stuff, because we wouldn't get everything we needed from, the companies that made the games. So we just would create our own stuff. Right. So if I'm working on this layout and I need a piece of artwork and I have the time, I made the artwork and stuck it in there.
Yeah, I found that I had to just kind of shoot from the hip too. And oftentimes, they would say, this is what we want Star Fox to, doing, And I know I feel bad, Stefan. I couldn't find that cover. I have no idea.
No problem.
I know you were just jonesing after the Star Fox cover, but it's like, so I would just do the sketch of what I think needed to be. And there really wasn't a lot of, back and forth of saying, oh, no, that's not at all right. No, he doesn't look like that in real life or whatever. I think a lot of times, a lot of the pieces that I was working from were just so, I don't know, they were pixelated. They were just, they were computer generated. They weren't really fleshed out and rendered in such a way. So maybe some of that stuff was the first time that I felt that I was maybe the one rendering it, or I was working from somebody else's drawing, and maybe it wasn't even a good drawing, in my opinion. It was like, oh, okay, well, I can make that look way better than that. So that's what I did. And so, yeah, like I said, I would bring in these sketches to Lynn, and she would look at them and say, yeah, that looks great. So I don't think I think the airbrush thing was kind of an initial look, or was just maybe what it was. But ultimately, I mean, I did stuff that, I would do hand painted stuff on stuff, not always airbrush, but I mean, it was always airbrush involved for sure. Yeah. But there's a lot of underpaintings and stuff like that I would do. And I did do some film cell stuff, like on Darkwing Duck. We would add these pieces in, and I did, because I wanted hard black line work, and I love that look of film cell animation. So I would do black and white line art for the outline, and then have that made into a transparency, and then I would do my underlayment of the color, and so it gave it a really interesting look. But yeah, I don't recall having a huge art direction of that. I mean, no.
It is kind of interesting that you say that you oftentimes weren't given much information, because I pulled this up for this question for a reason, because like in the storyline of Final Fantasy II, which is a number of hours long game, this scene is a very deep cut. Like you have to this is a very particular part of the game. So I was just kind of curious, like if you were, I mean, you had already kind of spoken to it that you didn't play through the games. But yeah, so and in an environment where like sometimes like there are certain covers where you look at them and say, oh, that the artist was not given very much information. There's a Secret of Mana cover that Dan McGowan did that is it's a dragon supposed to be from Secret of Mana, but it's clearly not the correct dragon. But this one really stuck out in my head, is like you either were very specifically told exactly what to paint, or you actually played the game for yourself.
Right. Well, and I can't really tell you. I mean, I think that there had to be this dude riding a bird and then a moon, and out of the mist. And that's probably all the art direction I got, and said, okay. And that was it. And like I said, they wanted to constantly give me games and go, well, do you want to just look at the game? And I go, no, I don't really, because I didn't care. And it was going to be all pixelated and all that stuff. And I'm not into that. So it would just tell me what you want, and then I'll just draw it, And so that's how it worked for me.
As far as, and I think this is going back to really, this is for Scott at V-Design, how prescriptive were they as far as like specifically like the kind of art that you drew? Because like I know most of the things that we see from you are like you, for instance, you drew this background image for Super Metroid, and like a lot of the work that I see from you is sort of like background elements or iconography, that kind of thing. Were you just like the guy for that, or was it like how was that distributed?
So at V-Design we had I don't know, 4 or 5 layout artists, I guess you would say. I mean, we call ourselves all designers, and every month we were given, a handful of games to play and figure out all the strategy, basically figure out all the content for these layouts. So we were not only doing, playing the game and figuring out the content, but we had to figure out the design, and if we needed artwork, we created artwork for it. What we try to do is create a design that kind of had the feeling of whatever we were talking about was. Mm-hmm. But there was no one saying it had to look like anything, right? So, I mean, you look at some of the stuff in there and it's wild. It's all over the place, but we just did it because, well, for me, the excuse is I was very young and I just wanted to try everything I could. And we were riding on new technology. Like we came from doing stuff paste up on paper without a computer And then computers started coming in, and we had Photoshop, and we can like make crazy stuff, and there was fonts, and we just went crazy with it.
Yeah, here's an example. I told the chat earlier in the previous panel that I would show this, but speaking to paste ups, this isn't any of your work, but this is a paste up of the Dragon Warrior map, and you're looking at about 500 Polaroids that were cut up and then pasted together. So yeah, that's how they made maps. But
yeah, those are painful to do.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to give you guys a minute or two to be able to plug anything you're doing now, but so I kind of wanted to close on how surreal is it for the three of you that you're invited here today, that 30 years later people are still talking about your work, that Scott, you and I were talking earlier, and you said some of this work you look at and it makes you cringe, but like it's still like super important to a lot of people out there. So like what's that like, knowing that your work has like is going to outlive us all and be continue to be appreciated?
Well, I can speak to that from another company I worked with, was Wizards of the Coast.
I heard about that.
And I did 4 cards, and to this day I still get fan mail and requests for signatures. I mean, every other week, every 3 weeks, I get a packet of cards. They give me some money to, sign their cards. And
Keldon Warlord is a great card. I got to tell you, Kevin, I love that.
Yeah, although that's a cringeworthy one, because he's got these stumpy little dwarf legs, and because I was trying to make it all fit in the picture, and I don't know what I was thinking. I redid that painting for an art collector, and he wouldn't let me post the final online anywhere, but I corrected all those anatomic details that drove me nuts and made the way I wanted it to be. So
nice.
But I was very flattered when you actually got a hold of me to buy my old artwork, because that stuff had been sitting in a flat file for decades doing nothing. They were still inside the original manila envelopes that V-Design sent the artwork back in. So I was just saying, this is great. This guy wants to, frame this stuff, share it with the world. I thought that was great, because it wasn't doing anything with me.
Yeah, no, I had the same reaction when he reached out to me, and he goes, well, do you have any of that stuff? And I had just moved to Whidbey Island. And he goes, do you know where that is? And I go, I know exactly where it is, because I just went through all this crap and before we moved, and I didn't get rid of it, which he was really relieved. And so I just sent him pictures. I go, well, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And he goes, oh my God, that's you. And so it was really, I was very flattered and glad, because I was thinking, you talk about cringeworthy, and I know we all, we have our stuff that we've done out there, and this was 100 years ago, but the fact that he was excited about it, and because I thought to myself, what am I ever going to do with this? I don't know where it's going to go. I'm not going to display it on my walls, because it's not what I want to display. But no, that was great. And so it's cool to know that there's, the only person who was really disappointed about this whole transaction, Stefan, was my son, who is, he's he's into some games and shit. And he's like, Dad. And I go, dude, he gave me money. I go, okay. But no, I think he too was very proud that his dad has, his pieces in this very, large collection that's pretty cool. And so he was like, okay, I get it. So that's fine. So, yeah.
Yeah, I pulled up this piece of yours because, and this is actually a note that I had, but I was looking for this piece for a better part of a year, and I was absolutely convinced that it was a Disney artist because it's very on model. And I had just about given up, and I worked for Disney for like 9 years, and so I figured I could leverage finding this piece, right? Gave up, couldn't find it, and then by happenstance, David and I connected, and the first thing he pulled out was this piece. And so as soon as I stopped looking for it, I was able to find it. Well, hey guys, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to do a little bit more Q&A because I know the audience has a lot of questions for you. But I wanted to give you a couple minutes to plug any projects that you currently have going on.
Well, my only project right now is I'm building a house and a big giant shop and art studio. So that's what I'm currently doing right now. Art-wise, boy, if you're interested in looking at other stuff that I've done aside from paintings and sculptural metal pieces, you can just go to my website, just davidharto.com. Other than that, it's interesting. I've gone through the art world, and I've actually picked up the airbrush, and I've done a couple of large format paintings, very different from any of the Nintendo stuff. It's very much more photorealistic and large automotive pieces. But I've, my art doesn't just stop with painting. I mean, I'm a sculptor, I'm a metal worker, I built a motorcycle that I race at Bonneville. And so I have my hand in a lot of different things that has kind of probably kept me from being, better known as one thing because I have too many irons and too many fires. Yeah, no, it's just a phase of my life. And, I haven't had any commercial work in years, and that's fine. But yeah, no, I'm very proud to be in your collection of work. So, and good on you for putting it together and taking the time and all of the due diligence to hunt this down. That's you should work for the FBI or something.
Right.
Scott?
I don't really have anything to plug. I just have a normal day job.
Fair enough.
Just I dabble in a lot of stuff. I got a lot of hobbies. I don't know if anything is ever going to go anywhere because I have a hard time finishing stuff. So, but no, I think it's amazing that I came across this. I was, like the other guys, I was going through my stuff, and I was almost. I mean, it was in a garbage bag. I was throwing it out.
I know.
I was throwing it out, and then I get this weird message. I'm like, what in the hell is this? Right. And this guy wants my stuff. Hell yeah, I'll get rid of it. It's like I said, it's all cringeworthy. But no, I'm just it's super strange that people actually like looking at this stuff that I did. But yeah, I think it's pretty cool, what Stefan put together, and it's just fun to be a part of.
All right, Kevin, bring us home.
All right. So, if people are interested in a lot of my work, you can see at kevscartoons.com. I did almost 10 years of cartooning for Starlog magazine. So if you look up my name with Starlog, you'll find hundreds of very funny cartoons. As for current stuff, I do a regular day job now. I'm not the crazy freelancer anymore. I actually do 3D modeling and drafting for manufacturing, building big, cool stuff, and I get a big kick out of that because I'm sitting there at my computer making little models and making drawings, and all of a sudden it's coming out of the shop and getting put on pallets and trucks and going out to clients, and it's just cool. And some of these things are 14 feet high, and
that is cool.
I get a kick out of that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, the three of you, for showing up, and I know we've talked a lot virtually, but this is the first time we've actually gotten a chance to speak really to any extent, and this was absolutely amazing, and I'm sure everyone watching also really greatly appreciates you showing up and appreciates your work.
Thanks
All right.
for having us.
All right, Frank.
Okay, welcome back. We're gonna open things up to audience Q&A here. I hope you've all submitted your questions. But right before I clicked back, Kevin was about to tell us a very juicy story, so I'm gonna kick it over to Kevin.
Yeah, so I was working for a toy manufacturer. They did little plushies and stuff for vending machine games, and we were trying to get work with Disney, with Star Wars through Disney. And so I did a whole bunch of plush toy concepts, and then we made samples to submit to Disney to get the work. Well, the work never came through. They never bought off on it, but I thought these are great samples, so I put them up on my website. And then they're up for maybe not even a month. I mean, it must have been a couple of weeks. And all of a sudden I get this nasty email just saying, you don't have any permission to put that stuff online. And I'm going, oh, Jesus, it's Disney crap. Okay, they're down. I take them down. And the other funny one was way back in the day when I was doing my own comics. I did a series called the I Don't Care Bears. And they were Care Bears, but they were all really nasty Care Bears like Pimp Bear and Drug Pusher Bear. And I got a cease and desist from the owners of Care Bear saying, you can't sell this stuff. And I go, oh, okay, I'm done.
Okay, so we have a ton of questions. I'm just going to get right to them. This first one is from Karen. Hi, Karen. I know exactly which Karen this is. Karen says, it was Nintendo Power that first made me want to become a game developer, so thank you for that. As a young girl, I noticed that Nintendo Power felt far less alienating than other video game magazines in the 90s in terms of appealing to girls as well as boys. Was that an intentional decision?
I think it wasn't intentional that it was inclusive in that manner specifically. I think there's a couple things. One, Nintendo's first party games are much less male directed. So that would make it more welcoming. And also whether it's male or female or kid or adult, etc., there was a really strong intention for the voice to be neutral. Like we didn't talk to our readers as to say, how was school today type of thing. It was a very neutral voice that kind of did include everyone. So I'd say content-wise, it's the games that were broader, and voice-wise, it was on purpose.
So a question from Steve from Houston. How cognizant were you of competitors like GamePro, EGM, Next Generation, etc.? Were you actively reading them and comparing content, or were you focusing mostly on your own work?
We weren't very focused on them. The biggest thing was that the marketing department at Nintendo was not allowed to share assets with those magazines, as opposed to reserving all the assets for Nintendo Power. So that was an issue. And before Nintendo Power, when I was in the advertising and marketing department, we had a pretty good relationship with them. So I knew all the editors and everything. But then once I moved to doing publications, then kind of that well dried up. So that kind of sucked. But also, ultimately, players' guides, they had a lot more players' guides and would get a lot more shelf space for all their titles. And Nintendo kept our players' guides only to ourselves. So you might have a guide might have a good game that had 3 or 4 guides out there, but Nintendo's games always only had one. And ultimately, I asked, after I left publications, I kind of switched up and said, we really should have relationships with all those people, because we should look like we're Kim Kardashian on every cover. We want Mario to have 3 guides. So that was kind of the relationship there.
We have quite a few artists in the room. So Nick Fraker asks, what was the process for selecting the cover art for an issue?
I'm sorry. I think that it makes sense what was just talked about in the panel, that Griffiths Advertising was the design firm for the cover. And so then they would hire someone like David, to do the cover art, or we created the sculpts or that kind of thing. But it was really important to us at Nintendo Power that we did not use artwork that was going to appear somewhere else. That's why we had all these original illustrations and that kind of thing. So the art that was created in Japan, or especially most magazines, had to rely on cover art because there weren't very many art assets. And so we invested a lot in wanting the cover to be something that you couldn't see anywhere else.
So we had a similar question from two people, from Matt Mitchell and Kevin Bunch. I think, Howard, this is probably going to mostly be you. How were the statistics developed for the charts about what games were hot? And then the other question being, how exactly did the top 30 point system work?
So early on, very early on, Nintendo Japan had a mechanism that they were using, and they just wanted to get my opinion and some others at Nintendo. So they sent it over and said, Mr. Arakawa said, and this again, there's, at the time, maybe 50 people at Nintendo of America. Mr. Arakawa said, can you fill these out? Maybe it was Mr. Oda asked. But anyways, they just had a list of 8 items. What was it? Initial feel, sense of understanding at start, graphics, sound, challenge, lasting interest. I'm missing one. Overall. And you just give it a 1 to 5 score. And it was a pretty simple, kind of comprehensive, but very subjective measure. And it changed. And one thing to keep in mind is it changed over time, because you were always evaluating against all the other games that you had currently played. So a year later, something that got a graphics of 3 might have been a 4 the previous year. So it was always relative to the time period as it moved forward. And we started out really with just the 3 of us, Mr. Oda, Don James, and I, doing the evaluations. For whatever reason, I think I was a little more serious about it. I'm kind of a mechanic or an engineer by nature, so I was always trying to think of what was working or what was not working in a game, and relate that to my own self as a player and also other players. If something that I felt was difficult, I'd try and assess whether I thought other players would felt it was difficult or not. But then we, as I mentioned earlier, we expanded to the Game Counselor 6 to the GC6 in addition to the big 3. And we would track each of those sets of numbers. And then we expanded to the game count, to the customer service people. And all of those eventually boiled down into the power meter in the magazine, which was just combined, like initial feel and sense of understanding at start was combined, and graphics and sound, I think, were combined, and lasting interest and challenge might have been combined, and then story and character, maybe. Again, it's slipping me right now, but it was a pretty relatively crude system. But what made it good was the fact that I applied it, like I evaluated all 400 games before I left, were evaluated in the same criteria. And in addition to those 400 games, I also evaluated more than 150 games out of Japan that never saw the US market. So we had a common measure. And, whether you think, well, Howard doesn't like this type of game, or Don doesn't like that type of game, the thought was that at least by having something common, then we could say, well, Howard really likes action games, and Howard doesn't like Dragon Warrior and Final Fantasy. And so it made it easier to kind of interpret those numbers in general in a way that could be applied to decisions that were trying to appeal to everybody. Like if we didn't want to put something in the magazine that everybody thought was lame, and vice versa, we didn't want to miss out on putting something in the magazine that everybody thought, or a lot of people might have thought, was cool. But I don't know if that answers the question. Type some more and with a clarification if you want.
I think you covered quite a bit of it. Question from Violet Field: did your jobs at Nintendo make you legendary among the kids and young people in your life? Howard, I see you
Gail?
laughing.
Yeah, there was, I had my 5 minutes of fame, and it was fun, but then it also got a little bit tiresome towards the end for a number of reasons. The kids were always, and players are always so enthusiastic because they'd immediately want to share their enthusiasm or challenges with a particular game or a particular point in a particular game. And so it could really relate to them very quickly and have a conversation of this shared experience. Like, I remember being stuck at the same place that they were stuck. But the fact that it started showing up in grocery stores and mini markets and gas stations and et cetera. And I always wanted to serve those people and, meet their expectations. So if they wanted to have a 5-minute or 10-minute conversation about a game standing at the gas pump, I felt obligated. But at the same time, my wife and, 2 daughters would be sitting in the car waiting impatiently for me to end the conversation so we could leave. So yeah, I got popular and it was fun and I enjoyed it. But at the same time, when I think to this day, when I see other pop figures, I think there's a cost associated with that. They just can't go out and relax in public. Thankfully for me, all of my experiences happened pre-internet. So there's very little kind of what happened that back then that became really pervasive. So I've managed to live a moderately anonymous lifestyle ever since, and I appreciate that.
Question from Bobby Najari. This is a really good one, actually, and I'd like to hear your take on this, Jeff. Did the magazine's relationship with game publishers evolve as the market share of Nintendo platforms changed throughout the years?
I'm not sure. I'm not really sure how to answer that one. I want to say it didn't really evolve, other than new developers coming into the scene. If they were making Nintendo titles, we typically had a good relationship with them, because we wanted what they had, they wanted what we could provide. So, it was beneficial both ways. So, but yeah, I don't think I have any really.
How about you, Gail? Because you were still EIC when the PlayStation hit big. Did that change anything from your perspective?
In terms of, for example, that question might say if someone was making a game on all 3 platforms, they would be less likely to want to give us exclusives or give us, be excited about it because we wouldn't talk about all the versions of the game. But I don't think, like Jeff said, they, of course they still want, if they were making it compatible with Nintendo hardware, they still wanted to get that exposure. How aware, kind of a different part of that question is, how aware were we that, for example, we were no longer going to be getting a good version of John Madden Football and eventually not getting one, Of course, it was, there were times when pushing against the idea of how cool we needed to feel or be, and whether that was a negative or a positive, Nintendo's approach to especially first party games. For me, always a positive 100% of the time, but not everyone and not the fans certainly were sometimes disappointed that we weren't going to have the version or the best version of a title.
Of course. Before we get back to audience questions, I thought we'd give the panelists an opportunity. Any artist questions for the editors or vice versa?
I thought that it's pretty fun. I didn't remember what Scott was talking about, but that is really fun that we said earlier how we felt that when things moved from Japan to the US, that we didn't have as much original illustration. And it's really fun to see that you were actually doing things that maybe we just weren't acknowledging some of that work. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a fun place to work. That was for sure. It was like my first job, and we just got to do everything. It was like a playground.
Yeah.
Well, I think.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Please.
I was just to say, it was a fun time for me because again, I was young too, and the magazine let me dabble in all these different art styles.
You drew some weird stuff, dude.
You're trying to find my voice, and they would just go with it. I was like, all right, cool. I can try this technique. I can try this weird thing,
All that really mattered in the end is, did it look cool? Did it like make the game look cool? And that's all that mattered.
It's for the kids.
Yeah, I was going to say, David was talking about Disney and the idea that they just, he didn't know, he just drew really good art and then it just happened. But it really wasn't quite like that. Both V-Design and Griffiths would work through the Nintendo of America staff to reach back to the license. We didn't just make Disney art and that they just let us do it. And I think I've told this story before, that we did a Batman piece and we had to send it back to Warner Brothers, and Michael Keaton thought that his jowls were too fat. And so it literally went all the way to the person. But I know V-Design had a direct relationship with the licensees and they knew which ones they had more flexibility to draw what they wanted, or to send over art and say, hey, we're doing this stuff. They wouldn't risk their licensee relationship to just make stuff.
So one of my favorite video game historians, Kate Willard, is taking advantage of their being a couple very early Nintendo of America employees here and asking, does anyone know why Koopa was renamed Bowser in the U.S.? Do you remember who came up with it? Was he named after someone? I think that's just Howard and Gail are the only candidates here.
Yeah, I'd like Howard to see if he remembers anything about that.
I don't.
Sorry, Kate.
What I think happened is that probably in a instruction manual or something, we decided to call him Bowser. And there was also some early animation where characters have kind of different names or it gets confused. And also remember that there wasn't really a global, there wasn't global communication at that time. So we could call it something and Japan could call it something, and nobody would know the difference. And it just really, until all of that gelled and we got a lot more sophisticated, those things had to come in line.
Mm-hmm. And when we were first doing our own translations, I mean, it was pretty hard scrabble. I remember like Dave Brooks or Brian Ulrich or Scott Pelland or whatever would just say, hey, get some names for these characters. We really didn't care that much. The game was the game and stood on its own merits. And then that was just something that was going to go. At the time, that was something that was a very minor part of the experience, perceived to be a minor part of the experience. And again, a really small company. And so you had a bunch of young people making these decisions that have stuck for generations as those particular franchises have grown and continued. So it's kind of fun that way.
Yeah, Dave and the Koopalings. That's a good one.
Koopalings is a good name.
A similar story is how Princess Peach was originally called Princess Toadstool here. And when I went to work on Super Mario 64 in Japan, Mr. Miyamoto asked me, well, is Peach a bad name? Do people not like Peach in the United States? And I said, no. And so at that point in that game is when she went from being just Princess Toadstool to being Princess Peach Toadstool.
On that note, Leslie, question from me. I hear that that was the start of your voice acting career, was Mario 64.
Yes, it was. Yeah. I was over there working on the game, and they had done some reprogramming and had some memory left for a little bit of voice. And they said, well, can you read this letter in Peach's voice? And I said, sure. I was the only English speaking person or woman around. And so I actually wrote the script in the morning and went and recorded the voice. They put it in the game and showed it to me the next day, and it was done.
Can we get a quick Dear Mario?
Dear Mario,
You still got it.
please come to the castle. I baked a cake for you.
Question from Steve from Houston. I imagine that subscription numbers got a huge boost from the Dragon Warrior tie-in for Nintendo Power. That's how I initially became a subscriber. From the Nintendo Power side of things, was there any special work that had to go into that giveaway? And was there a reason this wasn't done again with other games?
So I'll try to make it short. First, yes, there was so much work. By then, our mailing list was about 10 million, and we kept our mailing list very close to the vest. So we had our own in-house mailing group, and that group had to send out like 2 or 3 mailings in order to handle that, and then receive all the subscriptions, including checks and this and that. And they made themselves. I survived the Dragon Warrior giveaway T-shirts, and it was really it was just mammoth effort. But what happened is we got so many subscribers that the 1-year anniversary of that, we didn't have something as great to give away. So I remember one of the things I proposed was that we give away a cartridge that had Mario the Lost Level. Howard and I would name it the Lost Level because the only reason I knew that there was such a thing is I had seen him play the arcade game and finish it, and I saw what happened after you finished.
And now you're talking about the original NES Mario 2, not the Super Nintendo remake.
The original NES Mario, it didn't include what happened after you rescued the princess, but on the arcade game it did. And Howard, tell me if I'm wrong, but I had seen him play it. So we proposed that we could give away the Lost Level as an independent game. I was told absolutely not. And I would have to come up with another marketing idea. Anyway, ultimately, Player's Guide, Jeff and I have talked about this recently, Player's Guides became the default. And I don't think of course, the Superpower Super Club, but we didn't have any quite as exciting giveaways after that one.
But, the reason, the fundamental reason that we were able to have that giveaway was because Mr. Arakawa was so bullish on Dragon Warrior, and we just weren't getting the orders for it. It wasn't selling. And I think he pre-ordered something like 1 million copies. And by then it was 3 years old. In technology wise, there were Dragon Warrior 2, and I think 3 was out in Japan already, and they looked a lot better. And Dragon Warrior 1, relative to other games at that time period, just didn't look very, very good. Didn't look like a modern game, and games were progressing graphically pretty rapidly at that time. And Mr. Arakawa was very bullish, wanted to see Dragon Warrior succeed as a Nintendo franchise, and it just didn't work out that way. And so that afforded the ability to suddenly have all these cartridges to give away and in a smart way, as a way to kind of further keep players in the Nintendo fold by giving them the subscription to the magazine, so that, letting them have that subscription if they got the cartridge. So anyway, it was not just let's do this wonderful thing to promote Dragon Warrior. It was, what are we going to do with all of these game cartridges?
It was, but I think that you have to remember that the reason that specific game that he was willing to do that with it is because, again, he really wanted to get people to be able to like RPGs. So we had a little player's guide with it too. So if it would have been a game that he didn't think there was future promise or wasn't pushing the category, I don't know if he would have given it. He gave me the red glasses, you know.
Yeah, no, clearly that was, you know, what he was thinking was that we would be able to turn people's favor in the direction of the game, but didn't happen. And Enix ended up releasing the future versions themselves. And, you know, Nintendo in Japan had a very favorable relationship with Enix. And so that might have been part of the reason that there was the extra push in the US for it coming out. At the same time, Nintendo had a relationship with Square, and Final Fantasy came out shortly thereafter. And I think was more to the liking of players and got a higher reviewer internally than by a lot of players. I'm looking at their ratings
Howard,
right now.
Howard, I think we're going back to Howard doesn't like RPGs. And Dawn doesn't like action games.
But yes, maybe. No, I like RPGs that have some action component to them. And I also like RPGs that are visually stimulating, have nice graphics. I don't think you could say that about Dragon Warrior. But that said, the game didn't sell that many at all. and I think that's just attributed to the fact that players were interested in other types of gameplay at the time. And RPGs flourished later on, and action RPGs in particular flourished later on. But at the time, the highly pixelated, overly simple graphics with RPGs just wasn't that catnippy to players. I don't think.
It's the turn-based stuff is finally going out of style. Howard has had his way 30 years later. So
it's not me. I'm just one person espousing what I thought was relevant to the player base. And you know, Mr. Arakawa felt differently, and he pushed all these games out on players, and then we ended up turning the franchise back to Enix because it just wasn't being received well. So I don't know.
We're a little bit over time. We have so many good questions. I'm just gonna end it on this one because I think it's pretty compelling. Professor Daniel Greenberg from George Mason University asks, what tips learned from working on Nintendo Power can you offer young game designers and students looking to promote their work? Do you think there are common strategies between interacting with magazines and modern venues like digital communities, websites, and social media? And I find this interesting because I think of Nintendo Power as essentially what we call community management now within game publishing. So I'd be interested in hearing your takes on that. If any old wisdom still applies.
I very quickly, I think there's a use in interacting with evaluation sites, online magazines, et cetera. And that's that they see an awful lot of games, and it's their work is to be versed in the range of product, both whether it's an RPG or an action game or sports or whatever, in the range that way, but also in quality metrics as well. And so they can serve as a feedback loop for a designer or production team on how they're doing. Is what is resonating with them, or what they think will resonate with players, are the reviewers or the writers at these magazines who see a whole lot of games, is it resonating in the same way? And I think you have to be a little bit selfless when working with critics to say, okay, that I don't like what I'm hearing because they're being critical, but that said, is what they're saying relevant or true or have merit? In which case, you know, you have to internalize that and reflect that in whatever changes or modifications you make to the product you're working on.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I think the idea that Nintendo Power wanted to make sure that the customer is happy with the product and is able to complete it or get through difficult things, not to mention, of course, ultimately revealing Easter eggs or tips and tricks and hidden things. But, you know, knowing that, things like Twitch have taken care of that for the developer, but, you know, you can also steer some of that content yourself or do it in a engaging and meaningful way. So I think it's out there much more readily for people to take advantage of. But if you have a game, making sure that people enjoy playing it or understand how to get the most out of it, you've got a lot of ways to do that.
Okay, well, you know, most of the panelists here have been here for over 3 hours at this point, so I think we're going to call it here. Oh my God, thank you so much, everyone. This was awesome. We really appreciate this. You have helped us raise literally thousands of dollars to help preserve the history of games, so applaud to all of you. Thank you so much.
Hey.
And any final words before we cut the stream off?
Oh, thank you for doing it.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much,
So
Frank.
much, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching as well. And good night. And now I just awkwardly